Okay, the American Peace Society. The American Peace Society agitated for peace and gained momentum in the pre-Civil War years. They were linked with the European Crusade, which had made promising progress until the Crimean War in the 1850s in Europe and the American Civil War in the 1860s in America. Dorothea Dix, who worked to improve the treatment of the mentally handicapped. She traveled some 60,000 miles in 8 years, compiling reports of the squalid conditions from first-hand experiences in poorhouses and in basements where the insane were often kept in chains. Her efforts resulted in improved conditions and in a gain for the concept that the demented were not willfully perverse, but mentally ill. So she worked to change the public perception that the mentally handicapped were actually, it was an illness and not, their behavior wasn't because they were willfully perverse. 15 states created new hospitals and asylums as a result. She was eventually appointed superintendent of women nurses for the Union forces during the Civil War. Wilderness communities, utopias, the wilderness utopias. Various reformers set up more than 40 communities of a cooperative or communistic or communitarian nature. In 1825 in New Harmony, Indiana, the site of about 1,000 persons led by Robert Owen. It was a communitarian society, founded the first American kindergarten, the first free public school, and the first free public library. Brook Farm in Massachusetts started in 1841 by 20 intellectuals. They promoted plain living and high thinking. It prospered until 1846 when the new communal burning burned down. Nathaniel Hawthorne was a resident of Brooks Farm in Massachusetts. Hawthorne would be the author of The Scarlet Letter. And probably the most interesting of the wilderness utopia is Oneida. The Oneida colony was founded in New York in 1848, and it's the most radical of these wilderness utopias. They had practices including free love or complex marriage, the use of birth control, and eugenic selection of parents to produce superior offspring. Basically, the communal nature of this community was so communal that everything was shared, including husbands and wives. They believed in corporate marriage of all members to each other, so everyone was married. Communal care of children, so parents didn't raise their own children per se, the community raised children, and an equality of gender. The leader ends up having to flee to Canada to escape prosecution for adultery because adultery was illegal, and people outside of the community didn't agree with what was happening in Oneida. The colony flourished for over 30 years, largely due to its craftsmen making superior steel traps and Oneida Community silver. Oneida made silverware as well, and there's still a large corporation that makes silverware named Oneida. In 1879 and 1880, the group embraced monogamy and abandoned communism. Basically, the communal nature disbanded. The Shakers, or the United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearing, were established in Lebanon, New York. They were the longest-lived sect, beginning in 1776 and finally going extinct basically in 1940. They set up about 20 religious communities, a membership of about 6,000 in 1840. They were communistic in nature. They opposed marriage and free love, and that opposition eventually led to their extinction. They believed in celibacy, equal spiritual value of men and women, and the simplicity of architecture and furnishings. New members were adopted as orphans or recruited through conversion. The Amana community was founded in Iowa in 1855. They were perfectionists, a perfectionist communal society, and millennialists. Manufacturing business from the communities is still in existence. And then the Mormons are considered by some to be a utopian society. If you lump them into the colonial society or colonial utopian societies, they would be the most successful. The American family, the cult of domesticity. Women were growing more conscious of themselves as individuals and as sisters, as the male and female sex roles were becoming more increasingly divided. It was still a man's world, but women fared better in the U.S. than in Europe, especially in the West on the frontier, where women were more scarce. There were increasing numbers of women avoided marriage by 1860. About 10% of women avoided marriage. Women began working as school teachers and in domestic service. About 10% of white women were working for pay outside of the homes in 1850. About 20% had been employed at some time prior to marriage. Most women left their jobs upon marriage and became homemakers. This idea of the cult of domesticity was glorified. The traditional function of a woman as a homemaker. Women commanded immense moral power and increasingly made decisions that altered the character of the family itself. Godey's Lady's Book, founded in 1830, survived until 1898 and promoted this cult of domesticity. It was read by countless millions of women. Circulation was a staggering 150,000. Catherine Beecher, daughter of Lyman Beecher and sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, called on American inventors to improve the life of a homemaker, redesigned the American kitchen and home to provide more comfort for women and a nurturing environment for the family. Ironically, the labor-saving inventions made many women's life more challenging, as more work was expected of them as a result. Changes in the family. Marriage began to be based upon love rather than arrangement. So love more frequently determined the choice of a spouse, and families became more close-knit and affectionate, and they also became smaller in size. The average was 6 kids in 1800, less than 5 in 1900. Births fell by half during the 19th century. Contraception was practiced quietly and secretly. It was still a taboo topic in public, so birth control was used quietly, but it was still, in some places, completely illegal. Smaller families meant child-centered families. Corporal punishment was reduced. There was more of an emphasis on shaping than breaking. Children were raised to be independent individuals that made decisions on internalized moral standards. The outlines of the modern family were clear by the mid-century.